All right, good morning and welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. Why is this wire in my way? I don't even know what's going on. Thank you for joining me. I got all the smallest things throw me off. If you're tuning in live, though, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right, I will try not to be too distracted by things here. I'm going to have to change my setup a little bit, maybe get some earbuds or something. I don't know. Anyway, all right, let's get into this. First, let's talk about announcements. Tomorrow night, I'm going to have on another guest, Karlin Borsenko. We're going to be talking about the radical left. You heard about Antifa, probably from the media. And there's a good chance that you heard wrong. So I'm going to get her on the show. She has been infiltrating their organization, well, not their organization, but they're like their meetings online and in person. And she has been reporting back. And she's been doing this for like years now. And so she has a lot of information. We're going to try to distill it down to an hour. So look forward to that. That is, again, tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. I think yesterday I misspoke because I was thinking like yesterday was Wednesday, and so I was like talking as if it. So tomorrow night, 7:30. Tomorrow morning, I might have to blow y'all's mind. There's a clip going around of Joy Reid. She's like talking like, she's saying things like, back in the day, there was no taxes, there was, no regulation. And the framing of this like 18-second clip is like she's talking about that as being fascist. And everybody's like, it's fascist to be against taxes? Well, I'm a fascist. No, you're not a fascist because you oppose taxes. You have been fooled by an 18-second clip that was taken out of context and is not what you think it is. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So go look forward to that for tomorrow. But today, now normally on Wednesday, what I would do is I would do my POTUS weekly, right? It's where I talk about what has the president done? Do I like it? Do I oppose it? Whatever. So we're going to kind of do it a little differently today. We're going to talk about Pete Hegseth's speech at Quantico. And I watched it last night, and at first I was like, I saw the clips online, and I was like, oh, man, I don't know. And then I watched it, and I was like, well, actually, I kind of agree with a lot of it. You might be like, wait, what? DL, I thought you were a libertarian. Aren't you anti-war? Yes. Yes, I am I remain very libertarian, very anti-war. And what we're going to do is I watched this 45-minute clip, and I'm going to distill that down. I distilled it down to like 5 videos that I think are going to help explain to you why I appreciated his speech. So we're going to play these 5 clips, and then after the 5 clips, I will resolve this issue, if you even think it's an issue, of me being a libertarian and simultaneously being anti-war. So we'll talk about that after these clips. Now, in these clips, I want to tell you something. What I did is I clipped them, and then I did some audio editing, so they might kind of jump a little bit. There's only one where there's actually 2 separate segments put together. You'll notice that because it'll have like a nice little transition. But you might notice that it kind of jumped. And what I did was I edited these with this technique where you just remove some of the silence to make them shorter. So like in a 2-minute clip, it might save me like somewhere between 15 and 30 seconds. But what I was trying to do is just trying to limit the amount of time that we're playing it. So if it seems a little bit wonky, the way that you're watching it, just keep that in mind. So that's this new thing that I'm trying out just to see if it kind of helps the show be a little bit smoother. So let's get into these 2 clips. And I will tell you my thoughts. I'm going to tell you my thoughts from 2 perspectives, as a libertarian and as a former soldier. Okay? And so, like, this is why I thought this was kind of interesting, because, like, I happen to have experience not only as a soldier in the U.S. Army, but one who was actually deployed to a war zone. I went to Bosnia in 2002. So let's play this first clip here, and we'll check it out. By the way, in the show notes, you can go and listen to the whole speech if you want. Here we go.
But the world, and as the chairman mentioned, our enemies get a vote. You feel it, I feel it. This is a moment of urgency, mounting urgency. Enemies gather, threats grow. There is no time for games. We must be prepared. If we're going to prevent and avoid war, we must prepare now.
Okay, so let's start. He's like, hey, we need to prevent war. I like this talk. I like the idea that we want to prevent war. Okay, so that already stands out. I don't want us to build up our military for the purpose of, well, now that we have a built-up military, let's go conquer some stuff. But I do like the idea of building up our military so they are prepared for war, and with any luck, because, you know, he says it somewhere in his speech, your enemy gets a vote. And in other words, they can kind of help decide if you go to war or not. The enemy attacks you, you're going to war more than likely, right? So, yes, I get it. You know, our halls of Congress, our president, you know, politicians, they will drag us into wars that maybe we don't need to be in. That's a different conversation. We'll touch up on that in a little bit here. But I'm just saying, like, yeah, I think there's a good thing in this. And so I'm already just, you know, a few seconds into this first clip, and I'm like, yeah, I'm good with it. So let's play.
We are the strength part of peace through strength. And either we're ready to win or we are not. You see, this urgent moment, of course, requires more troops, more munitions, more drones, more Patriots, more submarines, more B-21 bombers. It requires more innovation, more AI in everything and ahead of the curve. More cyber effects, more counter-UAS, more space, more speed. America is the strongest, but we need to get stronger and quickly.
Okay, so there is a little bit of concern here because he is talking about, you know, basically building up not just our troops, but all of our equipment and all of our technology. And I understand the idea, you know, that some might have and say, like, well, wait until we get into that position and then, you know, then we'll build up. I kind of disagree with that. So I'm on the fence with this one a little bit, because at the end of the day, what's going to be required for all of this? Hopefully you said, okay, why do I always have a setting off? Let me try that one more time. Hopefully you said it's going to cost us this. A little bit of money. No, not a little bit. A lot of money. A lot of money. So I'm on the fence with this because, yes, I do think that, you know, if China and other countries are building up their war capabilities, we unfortunately have to do it as well. Because think of it this way. Let's say, and I'm not saying, I'm naming countries not to specify that I think those particular countries are a threat. I'm just naming countries that we typically name when we're talking about these kind of things. Like if I said, if Canada does this, like it kind of feels like it doesn't make sense because Canada's like, nobody's ever thought of Canada as a threat. Okay. So when I say China, I'm not suggesting that they are an active threat to us. I'm just saying, like, generally when we talk about threats, we talk about countries like China and Russia and, you know, to a smaller extent, not so militarily, Mexico and stuff like that. So if China spends, say, 5 years building up their capacity, you know, building new technology, creating new things, we are 5 years behind them. And if they chose to attack us using this 5 years of productivity, and then we decided, well, now we're going to play catch up, can we do it while waging a war and not losing? So that can be a bit of a challenge. And so when we're talking about, like, well, we need AI, we need this, we need more planes, we need more ships, we need more, there is a certain level of, I know I don't want to pay for all that, but there's a certain reality of do we actually need any of that? Or how much of that do we need? So in that context, I think this is where it would fall on the citizens to be more involved and pay more attention and say, what do we have that we know about, right? Like, 'cause there's always going to be the stuff. There's always the, the secrets that our government has that other governments have. Okay. So disregard those for a second. Just say, what do we know that other countries have? What do we know that we have? And if we can look at our supplies and say, okay, our supplies are relatively equal to some other countries, major countries, then I think we're in a good place. Now, if our government says, well, we just need to, they have 10,000 bombers and we need 50,000 bombers, we as citizens can look and say, we don't need 50,000. 15,000 to their 10,000 will be fine. 10,000 to 10,000 will be fine. We can do that. So I think the counterbalance to because the military is always going to want more money. They will never turn down money to build new things, to whatever. They're not going to do it. That's where citizens are. Their role is to pay attention and say, what do you have? Nah, you're good enough. You have what you need. And if we get to a place where you need more, then we will appropriate more money for that. That's how the citizens manage this. Because at the end of the day, yes, I'm a libertarian. Yes, I believe taxation is theft. Always, not sometimes. But I also do fall on the side of having a government, which means some of those things that I don't like are a necessary evil. Right? We could have a conversation maybe in the future about how would we pay for the government without taxes. We're not there. We're not anywhere close to there. So my advice is to say, get involved, be mindful, and hold your representatives accountable for the money they spend everywhere, not just the military. We're talking about the military today, but everywhere. And just acknowledge and say, yes, taxation is theft. Also, yes, right now to run a government, we need money. And then also, again, taxes are the current way that we have. So let's start with being mindful of how much you're spending, how much you're taking in the first place. We can only do that if we're involved. So I just wanted to kind of point out, like, I'm not fully on board, like a blank check, like, yep, just go buy whatever you think you need, because the military, they will just gobble that check up like it's a little kid going to a candy store. All right.
Speech today is about people, and it's about culture. The topic today is about the nature of ourselves, because no plan, no program, no reform, no formation will ultimately succeed unless we have the right people and the right culture at the War Department. If I've learned one core lesson in my 8 months in this job, it's that personnel is policy. Personnel is policy. The best way to take care of troops is to give them good leaders committed to the warfighting culture of the department. Not perfect leaders, good leaders, competent, qualified, professional, agile, aggressive, innovative, risk-taking, apolitical, faithful to their oath and to the Constitution.
Okay, so I think he set the stage here for because this is early on in his speech. I think he sets the stage for what is to come. Now, when I initially watched the speech, I didn't really have I saw a few clips online and I saw some people griping and I was like, okay, let me go check out the fullness of his speech so that I have a little bit better idea of where I stand. Because sometimes a clip, you watch a clip and you get one impression, then you go watch the full thing or maybe a longer clip, and then you get an entirely different perception. And you're like, wow, that definitely didn't come across that way in this tiny little clip. So as I watched it, this is my takeaway, because I was one time a soldier. I was an E4. I was an enlisted member. I was never an officer. My impression is that this speech, he gathered up all the brass, all these officers, some like 800, and in a room to talk to them. And some people might say, well, couldn't he have sent out an email? Perhaps, but I think that the conversation, the speech, was designed to, number one, say, this is our new direction. Number two, like, let the the top brass, no, this is your new direction, this is our new directive. But more importantly, I think this speech was for the troops to say, here, you know, it's kind of like if I get pulled over by an officer and the officer is not doing his job well, he's being inappropriate in some way. Okay, maybe he's, you know, whatever, making stuff up. I don't know, whatever. He's wrong. Well, in that particular situation, the dynamic is I don't get to tell him he's wrong. Okay, because he's pulled me over. He's the one that has the power in the moment. And he also has backup and all these things that I don't have access to. Okay, but that doesn't mean that doesn't make him right. So where does that happen? In the courtroom. In the courtroom, a judge could call out an officer and say, I don't know whether they do or not, it's a different story, but they can. They can call out and they can say, you were wrong. You mistreated this citizen. You need to be punished, right? Like that's the place where that could kind of happen, right? In this particular case, I think that Pete Hegseth, I think in a sense, he was talking to his audience was recruits and potential recruits. And he was telling them, hey, we are going to make you a badass. We are changing things so that you can be a badass. And I'm letting you know that I'm putting top brass on alert of what's to come. So I think if I was a soldier and I listened to his whole speech, I would have been cheering. I'd have been like, whoa, yeah, we're going to be a new badass army, you know, or Marines or whomever, right? That's how I would have taken it. Now, I take it a little differently today because I'm a libertarian. I'm no longer a soldier, so on and so forth. But there's a part of me that says, yeah, no. I like what he said. I think what he said is good. And I'll tell you why after we watch these clips. Okay, I'll kind of get into more of a summary of my perspective, an overall summary. But my opinion is that, you know, because I saw people criticizing him online, and I was like, I bet, you know, some of them I was for sure. I'm like, you're not a soldier. You never were a soldier, right? So I know, I understand that you don't get it, you know. But I don't think that he just gathered a bunch of people in to have a meeting and tell them something he could have just emailed them about. I think it was absolutely appropriate for him to gather everybody up and say, all right, leadership, you're on alert. We're making some changes. And these changes are largely going to impact our soldiers, you know, the ones that are the boots on the ground, not the brass that sit in the back necessarily and make decisions. So let's go to the second clip here, and we'll continue listening. This second clip, he's talking about a litmus test, okay?
And the litmus test for these changes, it's pretty simple. Would I want my eldest son, who is 15 years old, eventually joining the types of formations that we are currently wielding? If in any way the answer to that is no, or even yes, but, then we're doing something wrong. Because my son is no more important than any other American citizen who dons the cloth of our nation. He is no more important than your son, all precious souls made in the image and likeness of God.
Okay. This is the kind of thing that a leader absolutely needs to be thinking, like the kind of thinking that we need. Hey, if it's your son, I want your son to be treated like it was my son. Because at the end of the day, that's who's going out. It's our sons, our daughters, right? We can go on further. We can say our brothers and our sisters, our fathers and our mothers, right? But I like the way that he frames this and saying, like, if it's not good enough for my son, then why would I expect it to be good enough for your son? And we have this problem right now in our government. Our government makes decisions not on the basis of, you know, is this something that, you know, our sons would want, that we would want for our sons, right? I think that they make a lot of decisions that are self-serving, and I think that's partly our own problem, you know, our own fault as citizens. We have failed to hold them accountable. But in this particular case, I think Pete Hegseth is correct. He's like, look, I'm going to start with my son, and then I'm going to, say if your son is just as important as mine. And so if I wouldn't let my son do it, I'm not going to ask you to send your son to do it. Let's continue.
Every parent deserves to know that their son or their daughter that joins our ranks is entering exactly the kind of unit that the Secretary of War would want his son to join. Think of it as the golden rule test. Jesus said, do unto others that which you would have done unto yourself. It's the ultimate simplifying test of truth. The new War Department golden rule is this: do unto your unit as you would have done unto your own child's unit. Would you want him serving with fat or unfit or undertrained troops? Or alongside people who can't meet basic standards? Or in a unit where standards were lowered so certain types of troops could make it in? In a unit where leaders were promoted for reasons other than merit, performance, and warfighting? The answer is not just no, it's hell no.
So let me tell you a story here. When he's talking about leaders that aren't fit. When I joined the military, my MOS was Echo 35, radio and ComSec repair. I think they may have changed it since then. I mean, this was like the late 90s, okay? So bear with me. I'm a little on the old side, guys. And I joined, so my basic training was actually co-ed because I didn't initially join something like infantry or something like that, which would have been all males. And it's very interesting because when he talks about like unfit soldiers and all this other stuff, like there were soldiers that I was side by side with that I didn't think should cut it, male and female, right? Not just one or the other. And so I think he brings up a valuable point in saying, like, would you want your child to serve with somebody who's not fit to serve, who might get them killed? Because he reiterates this later. He points out the job of the military is to blow stuff up and to kill people. That is their job at the end of the day. And that's what they need to be trained to do. And if I am, as a soldier, am walking along, on a battlefield with somebody, I need to know that the person on my left and the person on my right is no less capable than I am. And they need that assurance as well. So I think this is why I say I think this is a good way to look at it. Because at the end of the day, when you are in battle, you need to know that either person on your side, and they need to know that the people on their side are ready to help them come home. Because we want our sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters to come home.
This means at the War Department, first and foremost, we must restore a ruthless, dispassionate, and common sense application of standards. I don't want my son serving alongside troops who are out of shape, or in combat unit with females who can't meet the same combat arms physical standards as men, or troops who are not fully proficient on their assigned weapons, platform, or task, or under a leader who was the first, but not the best. Standards must be uniform, gender neutral, and high. If not, they're not standards. They're just suggestions. Suggestions that get our sons and daughters killed. When it comes to combat arms units, and there are many different stripes across our joint force, the era of politically correct, overly sensitive, don't hurt anyone's feelings leadership ends right now.
He's right. He is absolutely right. We cannot stress this enough. The military is about killing people. That's their role. Now, yeah, everybody has jobs they do within the military. You've got like JAG officers and you've got people that are cooks and, but at the end of the day, everybody is supposed to be able to kill the enemy. That is the purpose for a military. Period. We need soldiers that can carry their weight. Let me tell you a story from when I went to Bosnia. So I started out as Echo 35. I was radio and ComSec repair. That's basically the guy in the back that sits in a nice comfy box that's air conditioning. You got electricity, lights, a nice little bed, and, you know, all these things that I can fix radios with. That's what I did. It was nice, right? But you're not on the front lines. Later on, because I moved around to different National Guard units, I ended up going to an infantry unit, and then I had to go for infantry training. And that was 11 Bravo. And when I was in the training, we were doing like a mission, right? It was like a mock mission where, you know, we would march to a location, then we would engage in, you know, fake battle. And along the way, we had to carry, you know, all the equipment that was assigned to us. And I remember there was a guy, we were walking. I mean, it wasn't even like a harsh march. It was just basically walking. It's almost like going for a hike in the woods, but with lots of equipment for the military. And he decided his feet hurt and he needed to sit. And I was like, dude, come on. And he was a little bigger than me. And I was like, dude, come on. And he was like, I got to sit. I just got to rest. That's not the kind of person that I want in a real battle. Now, you might say, well, in a real battle, he might be able to, you know, pull through. Maybe, maybe not. Right? You need to train as you will fight. When I was growing up, it was well known that Michael Jordan would train the same way that he would play. And other players were known to do that as well. And so they didn't get out there and just train kind of haphazardly, you know, give it a little bit, you know, 50%. They went out there and they trained hard so that when it was time to play the game, they were absolutely ready to engage their opponent and win. The same idea applies to the military. And so I agree with him that we want people that are fit. We want a single standard that we know everybody can meet. And he does acknowledge at one point, I don't know if it's in any of the clips that I can't remember now, if it's in any of the clips that I have, but he acknowledges at one point that yes, some women will not make it. He also acknowledges that some men will not make it. I knew men that I didn't think should be qualified in the infantry. I knew men that I was like, I don't know that you should be in the Army. If I'm willing to cut some men, yes, I'm going to be willing to cut some women. Now, if you want to argue like, hey, combat roles are different than the rear roles, fine, we could have that argument. Personally, I look at it and I say, again, I go back to what is the purpose of the military? Blow stuff up, kill people. Do I want them to just go out and start killing people left and right? No. But when it comes down to it, when there's a conflict and you have people shooting at you, I want you well trained so that you can shoot back and come home. Period. So let's take a look at this next video. This is the third of 5. Here he talks about leadership. Because how do you get soldiers in line without good leadership? Right? You can't. So let's hear what he said about them. Maybe. Hold on, let me click that.
On the topic of standards, allow me a few words to talk about toxic leaders. Upholding and demanding high standards is not toxic. Enforcing high standards, not toxic leadership. Leading warfighters toward the goals of high, gender-neutral, and uncompromising standards in order to forge a cohesive, formidable, and lethal Department of War is not toxic. It is our duty, consistent with our constitutional oath. Real toxic leadership is endangering subordinates with low standards. Real toxic leadership is promoting people based on immutable characteristics or quotas instead of based on merit. Real toxic leadership is promoting destructive ideologies that are an anathema to the Constitution and the laws of nature and nature's God.
100%. That is not good leadership. It's really not good leadership anywhere if you kind of modify some of the language to fit other other areas. But again, you have to think, what is the focus here? In this particular case, the focus is war, right? I do appreciate that they renamed it the Department of War. Hopefully, as a libertarian, that will put it in people's mind that, hey, do we really want to go to war? Do we want to be involved in this conflict? Because I feel like the Department of Defense kind of allowed in the minds of citizens to think of things as we're defending stuff. So therefore, yes, let's send troops to these places, this place and that place. Who makes those decisions? Leaders do. Hopefully, now that it's back to the Department of War, in the minds of people, when they think of sending our military somewhere, they will not be thinking of them as, oh, we're just going to send them to defend democracy, whatever the hell that means. They will think of it as, this is the Department of War. Is this war? Should we be sending our troops? Yes or no? And hopefully, in many cases, most cases, hopefully every case, they will say, no, we do not want to send them there. But if we do, hopefully, we will say that is a conflict that we need to be engaged in, and we want leaders who have properly prepared our soldiers to go and win.
As Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, the definition of toxic has been turned upside down, and we're correcting that. That's why today, at my direction, we're undertaking a full review of the department's definitions of so-called toxic leadership, bullying, and hazing, to empower leaders to enforce standards without fear of retribution or second guessing. Of course, you can't do like nasty bullying and hazing. We're talking about words like bullying and hazing and toxic. They've been weaponized and bastardized inside our formations, undercutting commanders and NCOs.
Okay, he is correct, and this is not going to be comfortable for people to hear. I don't like the idea of bullying. However, my idea of bullying and a more progressive idea of bullying are not the same. And so I would look at some of the things that progressives would say are bullying, and I would absolutely say that is toxic, and that is, like he said, a bastardization of the term. You have weaponized it to make yourself feel good. And so on this one, like, I don't know that I'm fully on board, because when he said, he kind of hints at like, we're going to allow bullying and hazing. What does that mean? I mean, if he's like, we're going to go back to having lock and sock parties, then no, I don't think that is necessary at all. Or a soap party. If you're not familiar with that, that would be when you have a troop, a bunch of troops in basic training. Like if one person made a mistake, then the whole platoon might get in trouble, and then the whole platoon, to incentivize the single person who's causing problems, they might, in the middle of the night, come over. Several of them would take a blanket on each corner and put the blanket over them, hold it down, while another one or two or however many come with a bar of soap in the sock and then just smack him and hit him. It's pretty violent. That's not what I would support. Okay? That's the kind of bullying and hazing that I think has gone way too far. That's clearly within the confines of what I would consider to be a reasonable definition of bullying and hazing. Unacceptable. I don't think that makes for better soldiers. So I would need to know exactly what he's talking about. But that doesn't mean that what we have now is necessarily a good thing. And a lot of words from progressive people have been taken. They will take what it means to be a bully, and then they will be so inclusive. It's like they take their inclusivity and they use it on the words as well. And so then it goes from one extreme to the other, right? You got maybe some people who say that's not bullying, and so they're way too wide open. or way too narrow on what they would consider to be bullying. But then the opposite extreme is you're way too open and you include way too many things. And so the answer is to find, okay, what is bullying somewhere in the middle? You know, what would be acceptable and what is taking it too far? So I think I'm kind of on board with this one, but kind of need to know exactly what he's talking about, like what kind of examples, and he doesn't give any examples in his speech. So there we are in the bullying, but I do agree that things have gone, you know, way too far to the more progressive level. And I'll explain that, I think, in the next clip. I'll explain more what I mean by that.
No more. Setting, achieving, and maintaining high standards is what you all do. And if that makes me toxic, then so be it. Second, today at our direction, we're ensuring that every service, every unit, every schoolhouse, and every form of professional military education conduct an immediate review of their standards. Now, we've done this in many places already, but today it goes across the entire Department of War. And when we give you this guidance, we know mistakes will be made. It's the nature of leadership. But you should not pay for earnest mistakes for your entire career. And that's why today, at my direction, we're making changes to the retention of adverse information on personnel records that will allow leaders with forgivable, earnest, or minor infractions to not be encumbered by those infractions in perpetuity. People make honest mistakes, and our mistakes should not define an entire career. Otherwise, we only try not to make mistakes, and that's not the business we're in. We need risk takers and aggressive leaders and a culture that supports you.
So that is something that's very difficult to balance. On one hand, you don't want people that are making mistakes, right? Whether it's an honest mistake or it's something on purpose. They do something on purpose to get away with it, right? There are certain things you don't want people to do and go unpunished for. On the other hand, you don't want people's whole entire careers to be defined by something that really should be minor, ignored, or whatever, right? Or perhaps it's somewhere in the middle. They do something, it's not the most egregious in the world, but it was inappropriate. And so perhaps for the next few years, they have to deal with it until they show that, yes, they have resolved whatever it was that got them to, to making that decision, right? So I agree with this, because you cannot have the best if you do not have some flexibility with your leaders. Now, again, this has to be balanced, and maybe I agree with where he draws the line, because, again, he doesn't specify exactly. He doesn't say, something like this would be okay and something like this would not be okay. He doesn't say that. So it's not clear whether or not I would agree with where he draws the line. But I do agree with the idea that, yes, you need to empower your leaders and you need to stand behind them. So when I was the chair for here in Duval County for the Libertarian Party, one of the things that I told all of our leaders, I said, look, when you post memes, when you get online, when you're doing your activism, I said, leave me room to defend you. If you go crazy, if you go online and you pick fights, like you're not just saying something and somebody comes at you, like you go and you pick a fight. If you're saying mean and nasty things about people, if you're doing crazy activism that's very hard to justify, then it's going to be hard for me to defend you. And there is no clear-cut line for that. So what I told them is I said, look, you leave me room to defend you, and I will. And every person that was under my leadership, I watched them. Sometimes they got a little punchy online. Sometimes they got a little punchy in a meeting. Sometimes they got, like if they did some activism, it was depending on who you're talking to, it might have been a little crazy. But I never, ever had a problem where I was like, you have taken this way too far. Right now, there were a few times where maybe I had to say, yeah, that meme, let's pull that one down. That's not really the message we want to send. And they'll be like, okay, and they pull it down, right? They made a minor mistake, no big deal. But it wasn't an egregious one. And that's the kind of leadership that I want in our military. Because if you think about it if you make a parallel between the military and the political party that I was running, they are both fighting for something, right? They're both fighting. Now, there's a different kind of fight because the military is trying to kill people. That's their job, as I've said, and blow stuff up. Whereas the political party, they're fighting for more liberty, for better candidates, for ideas to get spread. They have a different fight, but they are still fighting in a sense. And so in order for my leadership to be able to do the best that they could do, I need to be willing to stand behind them. So then I said, here are the conditions under which I will stand behind you. And they met those conditions. And I made them broad on purpose. Because if you make it narrow, then you make it difficult for people to actually deliver what you want them to deliver. In the military, we want them to deliver a win. We want them to deliver our fellow citizens back home. Again, as he repeats, he says repeatedly in his speech, this is life or death. Maybe not at the current moment, and maybe not for the next 10 years. But when the military is sent to deal with a conflict, it quickly and immediately becomes life or death. We want leaders who are prepared to make the decisions that will hopefully bring all of them home. All of them. So let's go to the next clip. That's my fourth one here.
There is no world in which high-intensity war exists without pain, agony, and human tragedy.
Right there. Again, I'm anti-war. I'm not a pacifist. I'm anti-war. That means I want us to avoid wars. But I also recognize that we might get into a war. And he is correct. If we get into a war, any kind of conflict, there will be human tragedy. First and foremost, I look at our own soldiers. I don't want them to I don't want tragedy to befall them. Now, we can have a conversation about what they do. We certainly don't want some of the things that we saw in Vietnam. That's a different conversation. The conversation right now is, how do we prepare our soldiers so that they are ready to go to war and come home? And one of the first things that we have to recognize, that war is nasty, it's ugly, and we should want to avoid it. But when we can't, conquer. When I was taking martial arts, back when I was like 15, I was taking Taekwondo, we had the ABCs of fighting. A was you avoid a fight if at all possible. Right? So the explanation, the analogy given for that was, let's say you're walking down the street and a block away, you see some guys that look like they might be trouble. Right? So what do you do to avoid that? You might just cross the street casually so that you don't even come in contact with them. Then you have B, back away. So let's say that you come across a guy or some guys and it's not possible to avoid. Maybe you turn the corner and there was just some guys and they start some trouble, whatever. In that situation, you back away. You say, look, guys, I don't want any trouble. I'm, just let me go on my way. Not here to fight, whatever. You try to avoid it, by backing away. You get out of the situation if possible. Then you get to C. You can't avoid it. You can't back away because you're confronted with it. Now you have to do something. C is conquer. You conquer the situation and then you move on, right? I want the same thing for our military. I want us to avoid. If somebody tries to draw us into a conflict, back away if we possibly can. And there's history for this. The 10th Amendment Center has talked about how, early conflict, we did our best to back away. But then eventually we got in and we conquered. Let's continue.
We are in a dangerous line of work. You are in a dangerous line of work. We may lose good people. But let no warrior cry out from the grave, if only I had been properly trained. We will not lose warfighters because we fail to train or equip them or resource them. Shame on us if we do. Train like your warriors' lives depend on it, because they do. To that point, basic training is being restored to what it should be.
Okay, this is where he gets... This one is interesting, right? But I do agree, train like your lives depend on it, because they do, right? In the same way that Michael Jordan trained so that he could help his team go to a win, we should train so that our military should train so that that team, when they go to war, can win, right? And again, I cannot stress this enough. We have to put this in the proper context, right? Michael Jordan wasn't at risk of dying, nor were any of his team members. So they didn't have to train like their lives depended on it. They just had to train like the championship depended on it, because the championship did depend on it, right? They focused on what their mission was. Their mission was to win games. So they trained to win games. The military needs to train to win war, conflict.
Scary, tough, and disciplined. We're empowering drill sergeants to instill healthy fear in new recruits, ensuring that future warfighters are forged. Yes, they can shark attack, they can toss bunks, they can swear, and yes, they can put their hands on recruits.
Okay, like what? I had to think about this one, actually. And here's why. When I went through basic training, they could not put their hands on troops. So I never experienced that. They also were not allowed to swear. Promise you, they weren't allowed to swear. And let me tell you, we made fun of that fact. We thought it was silly. Oh, you can't swear? Why did we make fun of it? Because we thought of it like this. If I go to battle, the enemy is going to do way worse than swear at me. It's going to do way worse than perhaps put his hand on me. He is literally trying to kill me with brutal means. So we thought it was funny. And when I was, they were test driving this, I think it was in the Navy, but they were test driving this thing called a, what was it called? It was I don't know if it was ever true or not. I think it was, but we had heard about this thing called a stress card that you could carry in your pocket. When you got too stressed out, you could pull it out and the drill sergeant had to leave you alone for 15 minutes. Now, again, I don't remember. It definitely wasn't in the Army. I think I'd heard rumors that that the Navy was test piloting it, right? And we made fun of this idea because we, again, were like, well, if I have to go to battle and somebody jumps out of the bushes to shoot me, if I'm stressed out, is that card going to suddenly work? Am I going to hand it to the enemy and be like, hold up, I'm a bit stressed right now. Let me please go sit down and take 10 minutes. No, you don't get that. So we made fun of these kind of things back in the 90s. I can only imagine where we are now with all the politics that have gotten into the military, where they're more worried about, your gender or your sexuality or any of that stuff that we didn't give a damn about. I didn't care if the soldier next to me was gay, right? Like, we might have made fun of him for it because it was the 90s, right? We might have been like, oh, whatever. You've been watching me in the shower, checking out, the soap running down my butt crack, right? We might have made fun of him. And was that a good thing? Not necessarily, right? But at the end of the day, what really mattered wasn't whether my fellow soldier was gay or whatever. It was, can they carry a rifle? Will they be there to help ensure that I come home? That's all that I cared about. That's all that any soldier cares about at the end of the day. Can you ensure that I go home to my mom, my dad, my girlfriend, my brother, my sister, my wife, my children? That's what matters. And so if that means that we're going to allow people to swear, which I think is totally appropriate, if that means they're allowed to do a shark attack, if you don't know, It's just basically when you get off of the bus, they just kind of swarm and they're just like yelling, they're in your face and they're stressing you out on purpose. That I did have. Like, I remember we got off the bus and they're just immediately yelling at you. You're like, you don't even know where you are. You don't know where you're supposed to go, but they're yelling at you as if you had been briefed on all of this. And you're like, and they're just like yelling at you, why are you doing that? And it, like, part of it is that they yell at you for things that seemingly don't matter. Like, they're like, pick that rucksack up. You pick it up, pick up your bag. You pick up your bag. I said, pick it up. And you're like, it is picked up. No, pick it up above your head. Like, you didn't know that, right? Like they would do these kind of things. It was very intentional. They would stress you out. And I remember being in my barracks. Now, mind you, I was in a co-ed basic training. I was also in a basic training that my understanding was lighter than other basic trainings because this was not a combat position, because I was radio and commsec. Other people were similar positions where you were basically the chairborne ranger, if you will. And so I remember we're doing like 10 push-ups at a time. And you might think 10 push-ups is easy. Yeah, until you've been lifting up your bag above your head, until you've been doing other things, and until you've done like 20 sets of 10. At a certain point, 10 becomes very, very hard. And so you're sitting there and you're like, you're trying to get like that second one up because your arms are just, right? That's what your arms literally are like. And I remember we're in there and we're at, I can't remember the term for it now, but we're basically with our arms stretched out in the upright position of a push-up. And it's an air-conditioned building, and yet there's a puddle of sweat below me. Like, I'm staring at like this, looked like somebody just poured water on the floor. Like, so much sweat was sitting there. And I remember hearing a soldier crying, a male soldier. And there was a little bit of contempt from me because I was like, bro, what? Like, did I like being yelled at? No. Was I doing anything wrong? No. Was I getting yelled at like I was doing something wrong? Yes. Right? And sometimes the drill sergeants that get in your face, that they see you kind of wince or something like that, like, oh, you don't want to be here? Just say it. Say you don't want to be here. And you're like, I want to be here, drill sergeant. Right? Like, that is part of it. And I think it's actually a good thing, because at the end of the day, again, you go to battle, things get way worse. Where virtually every soldier comes from is far more peaceful than where they are in basic training. Even my own basic training, which was lighter than what he just suggested. But if we go to battle, our basic training is far more peaceful than that. So you see how we need to get soldiers to a place where they are prepared to deal with the stress of conflict, of a conflict that may brutally kill them or the soldier next to them. So I'm mostly in agreement here. I don't know what it's like to have a drill sergeant put their hands on you. Okay. So I can't speak to that. But he does say something here in the next few seconds.
This does not mean they can be reckless or violate the law, but they can use tried and true methods to motivate.
Do you like how it motivate? Right? So I don't know what that means exactly, because I didn't experience it. Is it off the table for me? Not necessarily. I would need to hear more about what that might look like. Because again, we're taking somebody from a civilian place where you probably did not have the kind of stress that even basic training is going to offer. And you certainly didn't have the kind of stress that war is going to offer. So what we're doing is we're saying, all right, let's get you in a stressful situation so that you understand what it's like to deal with stress. And from my perspective, if you can go from a peachy life to and maintain your bearings under the stressfulness of basic training, then you are prepared to go from the stressors of basic training to dealing with the stressors of war. Because at the end of the day, until you get to war, you have no idea what it's like. It's like all those people that you see online and they're like, oh man, if this were a situation, I would totally do this. You know, if this bad guy got on the subway, I would totally. A lot of people like to talk. A lot of people think that they know what they would do in a dangerous situation. And a lot of people find out they are dead wrong. Sometimes literally. So we don't want that. We don't want people finding out when it's too late, they aren't ready. So if part of it does include putting your hand on a soldier, again, depending on what that means, I will support it because I want them prepared to deal with the harshness. I have been in conflict. I've never been in an all-out war. I have been in some situations when I was abroad and I was in a war zone. I had been in some situations which were stressful, and I felt like, is this the moment? Is this the last moment before it turns into a hostile situation? Okay? I was prepared for those. I believe, based on the training that I received, which took me from one place to another place, which prepared me to go yet to a third place. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's listen to the last few seconds here.
Recruits to make them the warriors they need to be.
All right, well, I guess I could. All right, we'll jump to the fifth video here. I guess there was just only like 2 seconds left in that one. So we'll jump to the fifth video, and then I'm going to reconcile all of this together.
A few months ago, I was at the White House when President Trump announced his Liberation Day for America's trade policy. It was a landmark day.
Okay, disregard that. I left it in so it'll make the rest of what he's about to say make sense. Okay, so we're not talking about Trump and Liberation Day and some of the things he's done. I have plenty of criticisms, and I even have some praise for him. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. Okay, but we're going to disregard that right now. We're talking about the military and what Pete Hegseth is the new direction for our military.
Well, today is another Liberation Day. The liberation of America's warriors, in name, in deed, and in authorities. You kill people and break things for a living.
Okay. That cannot be reiterated enough. That is the job of the military. You blow stuff up, you kill people. That's your job. Okay? Anything else is ancillary. Like if you go and you rebuild something, whatever. That's not what your primary purpose is. Your primary purpose, blow stuff up, kill people. Okay? That's why it's properly named the Department of War, because that's what happens in war. That's what happens if we're attacked. If we're attacked or we in some way engage in a conflict, whether I want us to be in it or not, that's what we're doing. Blowing stuff up, killing people.
You are not politically correct and don't necessarily belong always in polite society.
Okay. He is right. I want you to think about this for a second. I want you to just think about if the purpose of the military is war, and war entails blowing stuff up and killing people, what part of that is polite? None of it. So we need to remove this imposition of trying to have a polite society in our training. We need to remove it so that they are prepared to do what they are supposed to do. So it's like I want a soldier. I would rather have a soldier next to me that cussed and carried on and talked trash about anyone and everyone. I would rather them smoke, chew tobacco, call people faggot, all these other mean things, because that tells me that they're a brutish person. Right? Now, does that mean they should go out into the civilian world and do that? No. That's an entirely different situation. Does that necessarily mean that they should just have a blank check to call people names whenever and anytime and under any circumstance? Also, no. Even in the military, there is a time and a place for things. But I want the first and foremost thing to be, we are creating brutish people that are ready to do brutish things. because that's what war is. It's violent, it's ugly, it's nasty. We need people that are prepared for it. We need people that are prepared to hear nasty things, to be in nasty situations, and to come out of those situations alive.
We are not an army of one. We are a joint force of millions of selfless Americans. We are warriors. We are purpose-built, not for fair weather, blue skies, or calm seas. We were built to load up in the back of helicopters, 5 tons, or Zodiacs, in the dead of night, in fair weather or foul, to go to dangerous places, to find those who would do our nation harm, and deliver justice on behalf of the American people in close and brutal combat, if necessary. You are different. We fight not because we hate what's in front of us. We fight because we love what's behind us. You see, the Ivy League faculty lounges will never understand us, and that's okay, because they could never do what you do. The media will mischaracterize us, and that's okay, because deep down they know the reason they can do what they do is you. In this profession, you feel comfortable.
Let me pause this for a second. So I think he made some really great points here. He said the Ivy League, they can't do what we do. That's correct. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't people that would cross over. Maybe they could be military and they could be intellectual. I don't think that's what he's saying. That's not what I would agree to. I'm just saying, on a whole, the Ivy League, the academics, the intellectuals, they do not do what the military does. That is not their purpose. Their purpose is to debate ideas, to think about things, to challenge ideas, right? To come up with clever ways to convince people of new ideas or different ideas. That's their job. And their job has certain requirements and certain ways that will allow them to flourish in doing that job. Part of that job means that they will butt heads with the military. They should. They should challenge some of the military's ways. That is what I would consider to be part of the checks and balances. We want our military to be ruthless and trained, right? But that doesn't mean we want them to be reckless. That doesn't mean we want them to necessarily be imperialist. These are but we want them to be capable of that. And then we would have our Ivy League. They would challenge these ideas. We would have the media challenge it. The media's job is to expose things, to make things transparent. Their job should be to go and dig up dirt on what happened in a war and say, American people, is this how you want your soldiers behaving? Right? Yes, we want them to be brutal. We don't want them to be vicious necessarily in certain contexts. We don't want what we saw in the Vietnam War. Remember the movie Platoon, where I'm trying to remember the characters' names or who, but it doesn't matter. But in the movie Platoon, there's a particular scene where some of the guys are sexually assaulting a young girl, and and there's reasons for that, because in the Vietnam War we had draft and whatever. We're not going to get into that. But in this movie, you had these soldiers. They're sexually assaulting this woman, and another guy comes in and he breaks it up and he kicks him out of the way and he basically saves the girl. I watched that for the first time with the National Guard before I went to boot camp, because before I went to boot camp, I had to attend a few of the weekend meetings, or not meetings, but the weekend the weekend training sessions. And so we're sitting there watching it, just a bunch of us new troops. We had never been to basic training. We get past that scene, and then I promise you this actually was said. I blurted out and I said, I would have shot him. And man, these dudes turned around and looked at me. And I was like, that. When I was younger, I had a habit of saying things and then thinking about it later. This was one of those moments. But I looked at him and I said, what? And I said, you're there to kill the enemy, not rape and pillage and harm innocent civilians. And I stood by that, right? So do we want our military just being vicious in every context? No. Do we want them being vicious in the context of winning the battle? And when it comes to shooting and blowing up stuff, shooting people and blowing up stuff? Yes. Is there a time for some restraint? Also, yes. The media, they need to do their job. Their job is to report. If there's good things to report, report those. If there's bad things to report, report those. That goes for the military. That goes for our government. It's our job as citizens to be aware of all this. And then if we don't like what's being reported, then we make a complaint to our leadership, and then our leadership says, all right, let's knock that off. That's not considered acceptable in this society. Checks and balances are appropriate for all of these different entities, the citizens, the media, the intellectuals, the military. That's how we create checks and balances, by everybody doing their role in the way that role should be done. And then we hold each other accountable in whatever way is appropriate. That's how we create a better society. Let's listen to the last 10 seconds here.
Inside the violence so that our citizens can live peacefully. Lethality is our calling card, and victory our only acceptable end state.
Okay. The job of the military is to win a battle, not to kind of win, not to maybe win, to win, period. Now, let me reconcile all of this with some of my libertarian views, okay? Because I am anti-war. So let me define that. Anti-war for me means I want us to avoid conflict whenever possible. The ABCs that I told you about earlier, I want us to avoid conflict. If somebody brings conflict to us, I want us to try to back away. Let's try to get out of it. Let's not get involved in a war if we don't have to. Maybe we can have a peace talk. Maybe we can sit down. Whatever, right? There are many options that are available to us. But if we get to the point where we need to bring our soldiers into a conflict, I want our soldiers to win. And that can only happen if we root out some of this nonsense. Our country should try to avoid war whenever possible, and every other country should know, America, they're not getting up from their chair. Dad is not getting up from his chair, but if he does, he's bringing an ass whooping. That's what every other country should know. Like, hey, they'll sit back. They may even take a few bullets. You know, they may take some conflict from us, but we don't want to FAFO, which he said that in his speech at the very beginning. He was like, FAFO, the soldiers can tell you what that means. Right? This is one of the reasons why I think that he was actually talking a lot more to enlisted members than people realize. Right? I don't want our country, though, policing the world. I don't want our country toppling dictators. I don't want our country interfering in other conflicts between two or more countries. If we broker peace, that's on the table for me. If we want to say, hey, maybe we can sit down with the leaders of Palestine and Israel and bring you guys together and help, negotiate peace between you two, I'm fine with that. That's a good place for us to be. But I don't want us getting involved. I don't want us sending resources to Ukraine. You guys figure that out. If you want somebody to sit down between you two and act like your therapist, your global therapist, fine. We'll sit down, we'll hear your feelings out, and we'll tell you what you guys need to do to knock this off. I'm okay with that. But I don't want us getting involved. But again, if our military does have a need for war, then we should be 100% prepared to win. Let me tell you another story. True, I don't think I told you guys this one yet. I told my wife some of these stories, and now I'm trying to make sure that I didn't tell her and, or tell you and think I told her. But when I was at the range one time in basic training, there was a young woman there who was afraid to shoot her gun. And she was crying because she was afraid. And my first thought was, I don't want her in my foxhole. My own thought. Didn't care that she was a woman. There were other women there that were great. They were great at shooting. They were definitely robust. They could handle the PT and the stress. Great, you can be in the foxhole if it comes down to it. But I don't want her in the foxhole. Right? I don't want somebody who's not as capable as me or even more. And preferably, I don't want myself to be too far behind anybody else. So if I'm a soldier, I want you to put me through the necessary hell to make sure that I can help ensure that the buddy on my left, the buddy on my right, male or female, comes home. Because every soldier will tell you this. Their biggest fear on the battlefield is that they might let their fellow soldiers down. We should not have an army or military in any way that trains them so that they can't confidently enter a battlefield and know, I will not let my fellow soldier down. The worst thing that could happen to a soldier is that they come home and have to live with the fact that they let a soldier down, their buddy down, and that buddy died because of it. That's the worst torture that they could deal with. I would rather come home with a missing leg or arm than come home knowing that a buddy of mine didn't make it because I failed them. And how would I fail them? If I wasn't ready to be in that situation in the first place. So I know I'm harping on this a lot. I'm repeating myself because I know that my audience tends to be libertarian. I tend to talk about libertarian ideas on the regular. And as a libertarian, I do not want to be in war. But I'm harping on this because I want it very clear. In other episodes, I've been very clear that I want to avoid conflict, that I don't want our military being used in this place or that place. But I also recognize there are two battles, okay? There are two battles that we've got here. Number one is on the battlefield. That's where our troops fight. The other battle is in the halls of Congress or with our leadership. This is where the leaders and our citizens will argue about where we send our troops. So there are two battles. Right now, Pete Hegseth is talking about the battle that's on the battlefield. Are those troops ready for it? Currently, they are not, presumably. Again, I'm not in the military now, so I'm making an assumption based on what I see from the world around me, based on what I knew to be true, which I assume is not, which I assume they have done away with some things. Remember, I joined a military where you couldn't swear at somebody, which I thought was ridiculous. I thought it was ludicrous that you couldn't swear at somebody. I don't know that I was too bothered by the fact they couldn't hit me. I'm probably glad that didn't happen, right? But again, if somebody can demonstrate that it's necessary to ensure that the troops are ready, then fine. I will tolerate it because you willfully joined the military. In our country, we have a volunteer force. You volunteer to go in there and be trained to do a certain job. So that's that battle that he's talking about. I support him in that battle, most of what he said. Some of it I would need some clarification, but in general, I think he's correct. We need to train our military to fight and to be vicious. But then what I do on this podcast is that hopefully I train and I help lead my fellow Americans in fighting our leaders and saying, no, do not send our troops there. No, we don't belong involved in this conflict. We might be able to win it. Well, no, we will be able to win it, but I don't want them there in the first place. That's the other battle. But that's not the battle he was talking about. That's the battle for the domain of podcast, the domain of the intellectuals, the domain of the media. That's where us as citizens, that's where we fight. And we have to fight these battles accordingly. When citizens take an active role, then our government is designed for them to do the will that they want. We must demand strict adherence to the Constitution, or for my libertarian peers, even stronger than the Constitution, as far as limits on the government go. That's what we should be doing. Then, when we do those things, when we take an active role in our government, when we make sure that we are on the up and up with knowledge and we inform ourselves, and then we demand strict adherence to the Constitution, or even stricter, stricter restrictions. Is that right? We have higher restrictions than even the Constitution, right? Then we can prevent our fellow Americans from being involved in conflicts they do not belong in. That is how I reconcile all of this, right? Be prepared, and then do your absolute best to not even get in the situation in the first place. So hopefully all of that made sense. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. Let me get to some comments here and see what you guys are saying. Maybe you're lighting me up. Maybe there's a battle going on. I don't know. We'll see. Let's see what we got here. Let's see here. Let's see. Let's see here. Looks like I'm skipping past some of the conversation that's amongst yourselves here. Let's see. This would be a good time for Liberty Dad to give his analogy of the beach ball versus marble when it comes to government. Yes, despite the fact that I want a military that's rough, tough, and capable of handling whatever is thrown at them in the context of a battle of a war, I want our government, which is right now the size of a beach ball, to be the size of a golf ball. I want it smaller. We're doing way too much. And because we're doing way too much, we can't do the things that we're supposed to be doing correctly, supposed to be doing by virtue of the Constitution. I know that some of my followers are anarchists. I know that some of you don't believe in any government whatsoever, and we have varying views on how maybe the government should be funded and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, whatever we might agree upon that the government is okay to do, it's doing well more than that. That's why we need to be involved and say, nope, you don't need to be doing that. You don't need to be doing that. You don't need to be doing that. But you do need to do that. Do it well. That's where we need to be. Let's see what else we got. Time Surfing Alien says, I believe our military should be ready with the latest goods, but I also believe our military is overfunded. I agree. And where exactly, I don't know. I haven't looked at their budget and where it's all going necessarily. But like I said early on, I think if we look out in the world and we see that other countries have drones, then perhaps we should have drones as well. If we know that China, if we know, or they have, say 10,000 drones that we know of, then we might say, okay, we need to match that, right? Or some equivalent that keeps us prepared and ready to deal with, they have 10,000 drones. But if they have 10,000 drones, I don't think that's for us to go, well, I guess we need 100,000. That just, and I'm making up a number here, because there is a point for which we go, yeah, no, that's far too much. Because again, the military is never going to say no. They can be like, oh, give us more troops, give us more bullets, more guns, more tanks. Yes, that's what they're always going to say. That's why citizens need to be involved. That's why we need our intellectuals to do their job correctly. That's why we need our media to do their job correctly. That's why we need our citizens to be involved, to hold all of them accountable and say, intellectuals, in this case, should be, you're full of shit. Media, you're not doing your right job. Military, you have way too much. You have way more than you need. You need to scale it back a little bit, right? We can't do that if we're not informed, or if we don't have our head screwed on straight about what things should be and how they should be. Let's see. What else we got? I'm not opposed to this. End selective service. Yes. Fund any government department, including the military, voluntarily. I'm not opposed to it. I would support that 100%. I don't think we're anywhere near having that conversation. I don't mind that libertarians have that conversation. I just think that what we need to do is, while we're having the conversation, while we're, getting our intellectuals together to say, here is how we can fund the military voluntarily and be properly prepared to deal with threats from outside of the country. I think we also need to have a conversation and say, okay, Where are we now? Where might we like to be? Those are two different conversations, and we need to be prepared to have both of them, right? We need to be able to say, okay, in today's context, with what we have to work with, this is what we should be funding. This is what we should not be funding. So like in there, Pete Hegseth said they were going to end a bunch of unnecessary training. I think it's a good thing. You're wasting time and resources. Now, will they replace it with spending money elsewhere? Yes, because that's what the military does. That's where citizens come in and say, hey, it's great that you got rid of this unnecessary training, but that doesn't mean that you just need to go to the range, unnecessarily. There is a certain point for which you're just wasting bullets. Okay? All right? So that's part of being an informed citizenry. Let's see. Yes. Love this comment. That Liberty lady says, what I don't like is the fact that the soldiers get lied to why they're going to war. My father was in the Vietnam War and was in the military for close to 20 years. That is correct. This is, again, the checks and balances that I talked about, where you have citizens and you have the media and you have the intellectuals all doing their job. And when they're doing their job, we can more easily tell the military, no, you don't belong over there, right? We're not going to that conflict. Yes, maybe you can win. That's not the point. The point is, should you be there in the first place? And most of the wars that I look at, the answer is no. We should not squander the voluntary service of our fellow Americans. We should not waste their lives on conflicts that we don't belong in. If they die in battle, it should be for one hell of a damn good reason. Period. Let's see, what else we got? Maybe they should make war illegal and kind of like making weed illegal. Right? That's funny. Let's see. All right, I think that's all for the comments, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I very much appreciate you bearing with me, listening to Pete Hegseth. Some of you who are also anti-war, you might have cringed quite a bit when you saw some of the clips coming out online, but hopefully I have put this into a proper context of where a libertarian can say, yes, Hegseth is correct in the direction that he wants to take the military. And yes, there is a place for saying, while we are taking our military to a better place, that does not mean that we should necessarily get involved in conflict. Our soldiers should often be bored, but ready. That's like, if we want to summarize the libertarian position, bored, but ready. With that, I'm going to head on out. Folks, you can support the show. I encourage you to support the show. There's any number of ways. Go down and get you a 10% discount from blackguns.matter or blackgunsmatter.shop. You can find the link in the show notes. There's two links for you. You can go to just the link or the referral link. Either one works. If you go to the regular link, you'll have to manually type in Liberty Dad, or you can just go to the referral link. So you don't have to, you can skip out the extra few letters that you're going to have to type in on your keyboard. You can also subscribe to Rumble. You can also throw in some Rumble rants. I should probably tell you about that at the beginning of the show. Throw in a Rumble rant, at the beginning of the show, and then I'll read it and give it some extra due. Okay. You can also find me other places. Go to my Linktree, which is also in the show notes. Linktree/Liberty Dad. Go there. You can support me through Patreon. You can support me through Buy Me a Coffee. Those are great ways to support the show so that I can go out and find new resources to create a better show for you. With that, I'm going to head out. I will see you guys tomorrow. We're going to talk about Joy Reid. That will be such a joy.